You know, some books of the Bible, they're really comforting. The Book of Lamentations? Yeah, not one of them. It is a raw, unflinching look at a national catastrophe and just overwhelming grief. But hidden inside all that darkness is this profound and frankly really difficult message about suffering, what causes it, and the surprising hope that's waiting on the other side. So, let's journey into this darkness together to understand the tough message it holds about God, suffering, and what hope really looks like.
Right from the get-go, the book is brutally direct. The language is just shocking. It doesn't blame some foreign army or just bad luck for the disaster. Nope, it points the finger straight at God, painting him as an enemy who personally brought all this destruction. That is incredibly confronting language, and it's absolutely meant to be.
To really get this, we have to understand what was going on at the time. Back in 587 BC, the city of Jerusalem was completely, utterly destroyed by the Babylonians. The city, its walls, people's homes, and most importantly, this sacred temple, the very symbol of God's presence on earth, it was all burned to the ground. This wasn't just a military loss, it was the total collapse of their entire world, a theological crisis of the highest order.
And so, you can imagine for the survivors picking through the ashes, one question was just burning in their minds above everything else. Why? How could the God who promised to protect them let this happen? Or even worse, how could he have caused this? It's a question that just echoes through every single line of Lamentations.
Well, the book gives a direct and, let's be honest, a deeply unsettling answer. This all happened because of God's anger. And that's not just a footnote, it's the central explanation for all the suffering they're going through. But the way Lamentations understands anger is probably very different from how you and I might think of it today.
To really grasp this, we have to challenge our modern idea of anger. We tend to think of it as this uncontrolled, impulsive rage. But Lamentations presents God's anger as something else entirely, a rational, just response. It's not the random whim of a tyrant, but something that is deeply personal and relational.
The key to unlocking all of this is the idea of a covenant. See, God's relationship with Israel wasn't distant. It was a personal, binding agreement. So this anger isn't the fury of some faraway dictator. It's the deeply wounded reaction of a partner whose trust has been completely shattered. The suffering feels personal because the relationship was personal.
And what's truly remarkable is that in the middle of all this pain, the poet, speaking for the whole nation, makes this stark confession. There's no claim of innocence here. Instead, it's a clear admission of guilt. I have rebelled. They understand that their suffering isn't just random chaos, but a just, though devastating, consequence of their own actions.
Now, this brings us to what might be the most challenging and profound idea in the entire book, that God's anger isn't the opposite of his love, but somehow it's actually a sign of his deep and abiding care.
And that's a fair question, right? It seems completely backward. How can leveling a city and causing unimaginable suffering possibly be seen as a sign that someone still cares about you? It's a paradox, for sure, but it's one the text really asks us to wrestle with.
The logic here goes something like this. The opposite of this kind of relational anger isn't love, it's apathy. A God who didn't react to injustice, who just watched his people destroy themselves with sin and did nothing, well, that would be a distant, detached, and uncaring God. Anger in this sense is actually proof of engagement. It's the reaction of a God who is passionately committed to justice and righteousness. And this idea stands in stark contrast to other ancient ideas, like Gnosticism, which imagined a perfect God as being totally emotionless and disconnected from the messy affairs of our world.
And this isn't some new idea either. It has deep roots. As the early church father Lactantius argued, you just can't have a God who is moved by love for what is good without also having a God who is moved by anger at what is evil. For him, they were two inseparable sides of the same coin, a passionate commitment to the world.
But let's make no mistake, this divine engagement is terrifying. Before the book shows us the ultimate purpose of this anger, it forces us to look directly at its ferocious power, and it uses this vivid, warlike imagery to do it.
The imagery is just relentless. God isn't some passive observer here. He's the active agent of destruction, portrayed as an enemy archer, taking aim at his very own people. The text talks again and again about the day of your anger, a specific moment of divine judgment where there was no mercy to be found, only slaughter. And this is crucial. Nothing was spared.
God's wrath was so complete that he even abandoned his own sacred dwelling place, the temple, and just gave it over to destruction.
And perhaps the most terrifying image of all is this one, a cloud of anger so dense that it creates a barrier. The people feel completely cut off, like their desperate prayers for help just can't get through to God. It's a portrait of total and complete abandonment.
And right there, in that moment of absolute rock-bottom despair, the book pivots. Just when it seems like all is lost, Lamentations reveals that God's anger, for all its ferocity, has both a limit and a purpose. It is not the final word.
So, this anger is defined by three key things. First, it's measured and controlled, a just response to sin, not some random outburst. Second, and this is so critical, it is temporary. The text insists that his anger only lasts for a moment, but his faithful love is everlasting. And third, it has a redemptive purpose, to break the people's rebellion and pride in order to open up a path for them to return to him.
The heart of all this hope is found right in the central chapter, Lamentations 3. After describing all the horror in the first two chapters, the poet makes this dramatic turn, shifting from complaint to confidence.
And this is it. This is the bedrock of hope the entire book is built on. The grief is real, the judgment is severe, but it is not final. Rejection is not forever. Beyond the anger, there is a promise of pity and faithful love. The suffering has a purpose, and that purpose is ultimately restoration, not total annihilation. So the ultimate takeaway from this dark and difficult book is this. Suffering, even at its most extreme, is not portrayed as meaningless chaos. It reframes tragedy not as the result of a distant, uncaring universe, but as the painful, personal consequence of a broken relationship with a God who is deeply, passionately engaged with his creation.
And that leaves us with a final thought to consider. Lamentations forces us to look right into the abyss of human suffering and divine judgment. But it does that for a reason. What if facing the cause of our deepest pain, even when that cause is God's own anger, is the only way to discover a hope that is truly unbreakable? A hope found not in avoiding suffering, but in journeying straight through it.